Hi everyone and welcome to ISpeakSpokeSpoken.com. My name is Dan and today we're going to be looking at the top 10 mistakes that British people make, or the top 10 mistakes in British English. And these are mistakes that people use very often, and some of them are used so much that even people who know how to speak English properly have to check sometimes to make sure they're using the right thing. Even I sometimes have to Google some of these words to make sure that I've got the right one, simply because of the amount of times that official channels use these incorrectly. Okay, so let's have a look at them. Number one, principle versus principle. As you can see, the pronunciation for these two are very similar. In fact, it's pretty much the same. It's what we would call a homophone, which is a word that sounds like another word but is spelt differently. So principle, for example, is a noun that means a fundamental truth or proposition. So the principle of something. I have principles. I have a truth that I know, that I feel. While principal, although it is pronounced the same, I'm just pronouncing it differently to show you the difference, is like the head of a school, or an adjective meaning the most important thing. So the principal reason for something. Okay, so we're going to have a look at the incorrect and the use and the correct usage of it now. So for example, incorrect use is when we use principle for the main, because it's not correct. So the principal reason for his actions is his strong principles. So here we need to put principal, so the main principle. I know I'm saying it principal, but it's not. It's principle, exactly the same. So they sound the same. The correct one is the principal reason for his actions is his strong principles. So this is where we can use this. So fundamental truth or proposition, how I feel about something, my principles, and then principle as in first or main or important, most important. One that people get all the time confused. Just remember that if ever you get to a situation where you're writing something, or you're just not sure about what a word should be, whether it should be this, whether it should be this, just Google it, because it's all on there. Everything you need to know, you can Google anything. Just the best way to do it would be write principle versus principle in Google, and it'll tell you which one to use where. Like I said, with number two, it's something I do all the time. Okay, so let's have a look at the next one. So stationary. So let's just first look at the pronunciation. So stationary. The main stress is at the beginning of the word, stationary. And there is no difference between the two. Again, it's a homophone. It's exactly the same pronunciation, but it's a different spelling. Stationary versus stationary. Stationary means not moving, so in one place. Okay? And stationary, or stationery, as it said, refers to writing materials and papers and things that you might buy from a shop. You have a shop called a stationer's, and they sell stationery. So, incorrect usage would be he kept his car stationary while he wrote his note on his stationery. So this is correct at the bottom here, but this is not here. So we need to show that the car is still, the car is stationary. A good way to remember this is the way I remember it, and the way I kind of learned how to remember it, because it was something that always got to me. And actually, like I said, a shop where you buy stationery is a stationer. So a stationer is just this word without the Y. That's the best way to do it. You can't say stationer. Okay, so that's how you can remember that one. So a stationer is a person that sells stationery, and that's how you can make sure you remember that one. Stationary, AR, is when you're in one place. All right, excellent, good. I hope that helped. And remember, everything we've got here will be on that I above, and you've got the links below the video as well. You can do the quiz practice, look at the slides, and go over this again and again. Okay, so another one that gets people is advice and advise. Now these do sound different when you say them, so they're not homophones. They are two words pronounced in two different ways. But you need to make sure that you use them correctly. So advice is the noun. So, to give somebody advice. And to advise is the verb. So to advise somebody, it's an action. And it's maybe a case of spelling issue, this in this situation. So here we have an incorrect example. So can I advise you on that matter? And correct, can I advise you on that matter? The best thing and the best way to understand this and the best way to make sure that you don't make a mistake here is just when you look at the word here, make sure you just say it correctly from the beginning. So when you see this, it's advice. And when you see this, it's advise. And if you actually say it correctly, you can't write it incorrectly if you say it out loud to yourself. So, can I advise you? Doesn't work. So you just need to know how the different spellings sound. And if you know how they sound, you can write them properly. So that's something that, it's an avoidable mistake. And it's something that you don't really need to worry about too much once you know how to say them properly. It's all about pronunciation. Okay, so all together versus all together. So the two words separately. When it's said in a sentence, they sound exactly the same, all together, all together. But we just need to make sure that you use them correctly. So all together is completely or total. So all together, we're all happy with something, for example, we'll see here. Whereas all together refers to a group of people or a group of things working in sync. So working all together, two words differently. And actually, because we can see this as a sentence or a phrase all together, and this a singular word, we can work out which one we can use when. Let's have a look at the two examples. So an incorrect use will be, we were altogether impressed by the performance. Now, let's talk about this for a second, because it might be incorrect in this situation, but actually this sentence can make sense in another situation. But we'll talk about that in a second. So if we want to say we were altogether impressed by the performance, it means actually we were completely impressed by the performance, which is what we want to say, right? So if we say we were all together impressed by the performance, we're talking about the whole group was impressed. Now, in this situation, with what we actually want to say, it's incorrect. But I think if you wanted to talk about us all being impressed, you probably wouldn't put together here, because we were all impressed by the performance sounds better. You could put we were all impressed by the performance and then together here, and that might sound okay if you wanted to talk about us all together doing it, but actually this is slightly clunky and uncomfortable English if you do it this way. So incorrect, it might not be in certain situations, but if you want to say we were completely impressed, then it's incorrect. Okay, just something to remember there. And it's also, because we're kind of talking about quite high level things here, there is this ambiguity in what is correct and what's not. So it's something we need to think about. And this is where a higher level of understanding in the language will help you to just not make these mistakes that tell your sender or the person you're sending to, your receiver, sorry, that you are not an English speaker. So getting these things right will make sure that people understand that you know the language very well. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. So beside versus besides. Now, this is something that English people make a lot of mistakes on. So for example, beside means next to, and beside means addition, in addition to. So it's very different in meaning, but it does sound very similar, which means that people make mistakes when they write it. So instead of saying besides the river, there's a park, we say beside the river, because actually this is the preposition, whereas this is a word that talks about in addition or apart from. So it's completely different. So preposition-wise, beside is more important. So he is beside her, or we sit beside each other, or beside the river there is a park. So just be aware that that when you're adding more information or you're talking about more information, then you use besides. But for talking about something next to something, then it's this one. Okay, number 6, accept versus accept. Now, you can see that they sound pretty similar, but actually what you're supposed to say is accept. But it doesn't always happen like that, because even I, as a native speaker, will say accept, accept. It's very, very similar. So maybe in this sense you say accept or accept, but with the schwa here, which also you do find here sometimes, you will just sound, they sound very similar. Accept, accept. And we don't make this distinction too much. Maybe some people who working on their English a lot more, or people who had training in elocution may make a difference between the two, but those people are quite rare. So how does it work? So accept is to receive or to agree on something. So I accept it or I receive it. And accept is preposition used to exclude. So this, accept that. We'll take all of these, except that one. So for example, incorrect. I will accept all offers, except that one. So can you see? This is not correct because this is the word we need. Accept means to receive or agree. I will accept all offers except exception. So in this sentence, I will accept all offers except that one. This word accept is actually the verb version of exception, which means something that is not following the rule of others. So it's very useful to know that this exception and this accept is actually related in some way. So it's another way to help you distinguish which one to use when. But just remember that verb, noun, okay? Exception, an exception, to accept. Okay, next one, number 7, we have lead versus led. So lead is to lead, the present simple, and led is past simple. So he led, or he has led, so it's also the third verb as well. So let's see how we can use them. So of course, being in charge of something is the present, so he leads, or he is a leader, she is a leader, she leads. And then we have the past, she led the team, or he led the group. So let's have a look. So how would we say incorrectly? He lead the team last year. This is the simple, this is the present simple. So we should use, for last year, we should use the past version. So he led the team last year. Now just be aware, because this pronunciation sometimes gets confused, and then in that sense the verb form itself will get confused because of the pronunciation. So this one is actually quite an interesting one, because this is a word that many British people find quite difficult to work out which one to write, how to write it. So breath versus breathe. Breath versus breathe. So this is the verb form. So breath, of course, is a noun that refers to the air taken or expelled. So he takes a breath, she takes a breath. And so that's noun form. And the verb form to breathe is the action of taking breath. So to breathe. So the incorrect way of saying it is to take a deep breathe. We don't say this because this is, of course, the verb form. So you can't take a breathe. You have to take a breath, which is the noun form. So take a deep breath. This is noun form and this is verb, okay? So this is not, let's just put verb and noun so it doesn't look like a tick. Oh no, I made a mistake there. There you go, verb and noun. Okay, so make sure that you use the correct one. So I breathe, as in I do, and you take a breath, as in you take a thing, a breath. A noun. Okay, number 9 is the difference between desert and dessert. Now, okay, this is quite a difficult one for some people because you have to make sure that you not only get the pronunciation correct, but you have to also get the spelling correct because there's a difference. So, desert, the place of a sandy, barren landscape. This is only with one S, and we have the stress at the beginning of the word. So, desert, desert. And remember that the D, the Z, and the T are all the same. D, Z, T. But this is dessert because we have this stress here. And the dessert Well, it's the food you have after your main meal. It's the sweet food. Sometimes we can say that, how do you remember the difference between the spelling of desert and the spelling of dessert? Well, you can say, well, there's an extra S here for the sugar. Okay, you can say that. That's how I remember it, but it doesn't have to be that way. That's how my teacher at school told me how to remember it. Okay, so, but it doesn't help you with pronunciation, but you just need to know that if there's a second S, if it's longer, then that's where you have the stress. So it makes the word longer, therefore the stress. Maybe a good way to remember it that way. Okay, so incorrect. She loves to eat dessert after dinner. Doesn't sound very nice, does it really? So she loves to eat dessert after dinner. She loves to eat dessert after dinner. Remember, this is the word. 2 S's when it's got the stress at the end of the word. Second S is for the sugar in your dessert. Just remember that. Okay. Let's have a look at the next one. So born versus born, okay? Now, this is something that, because this word in English, in British English use generally, is a lot more rare than this word here, then I would think maybe it's not so important to worry too much about this one. But it's important to know when you do need to use it that you have to get it right. So born is past participle of bear. So a baby is born, okay? So it's the third verb there in the context of birth. So having a baby, for example, he was born into a wealthy family, just to show here. This is how it is. Born is used for carrying something. So we might say that some particles are airborne, so carried in the air. Or, for example, somebody was carrying something. The thing being carried was born. But to be honest, it's very rare usage, and we only ever usually hear this in the term airborne. But you know, it does come up, and it's important to know. So incorrect if you use this. Born into a wealthy family, that's not correct, unless he was brought in like this. But correct version, he was born into a wealthy family. Past participle of bear. Again, this is what we call a homophone, which is words that sound the same but are spelt differently. And actually, just to show you, so we know what that word I'm using is. This is the word, and it means that words that sound the same but are spelt differently. And a classic homophone is there, and this form, there. That's a classic one. But just something to remember, and we'll talk about this in another video possibly. But have a look through these, go to that link up below if you're on a mobile, go through it again, do the quiz, and hopefully you won't make the same mistakes that British people are making right now. See you soon.